Hello, and welcome to Postcards from a Soul and Her Human. I'm the human, Gina. If you're coming back again, thank you so much for coming again. And if this is your first time, I hope you read the intro. This is kind of an ad hoc, kind of off the cuff reflection of what I've been through in the last year and beyond, and where I'm headed, and including all the reflections, the perspectives, the lessons, and my spiritual awakening, which includes being introduced to a divine team of light beings who are guiding me on this journey, and the reason why I'm doing this podcast in the first place. So, if that sounds odd to you, you may want to listen to the first or second to get a better idea of what I'm talking about. As I sit here, I'm reflecting back on the last couple of weeks where there's actually been a lot going on in my life, and I've kind of made a point to keep my life pretty simple and essential lately as I went through this healing process over the almost the last year now, since the breakup of my marriage. I have made a point to really just have an essential life. Nothing extra. I gotten rid of a lot of things physically and emotionally and mentally, and really just simplified my life to the point where my time is my own for the most part, besides my work commitments, and I really just slowed everything down almost into slow motion so I could really understand where my energy goes and the things that make me happy and the things that don't, and really contemplate who I want to be in this time of reinvention. I'm in a place where I left an old relationship that lasted almost 25 years, and I'm in this new space, and I'm really contemplating who I want to be. Like, who is Gina now after what she's gone through, and what are the things in my life that are working and what is not working. And one of the things that I have hung on to over the last year after my divorce was my business, which I share with my ex husband. And I did think about this after the divorce, about just moving on and starting anew on every level. But I was still going through a lot of pain and anguish over what had happened. It was a pretty unique situation. And I realized that if I left my business, not only am I leaving my source of income and something I cared very much about, but I was running away from myself, which is not possible. Of course, I would tell others I'm running away from him, but the truth is I had to deal with myself and the way I was responding, reacting to what had happened. So I made a conscious effort to stay and learn whatever else I needed to learn. I didn't know it would be, almost a year later and I would be still there. I really didn't know if I'd stay another month or another 3 months or how long, or if I'd stayed indefinitely as long as the business was thriving. I really didn't know. I didn't wanna judge it. Excuse me. So, I stayed, and, I was with my ex-husband every single day. Actually, it was just the 2 of us that owned the business, and we only had a few employees, and he was the person I saw most often in my life. While we were together, we worked together, we lived together. Once we broke up, we still lived together. Once we were divorced, we continued to live together for another 6 months. And then that after we finally moved out, I was going to work with this man every day. I was seeing him every day at our place of business. So up until very recently, he was my whole life, both, emotionally and physically because my business was tied to his. It was his business was tied to me, however you wanna look at it, and so I stayed and I wanted to learn my lessons. I was learning through the material that I was going through, the gene keys and the human design, which were really integral parts of me, um, pulling apart the viper's nest of issues in my gut. This system, the gene keys, really identified for me from an energetic level the specific issues that I brought into this world with me, the specific issues of feeling inadequate and being a victim, and not living a life of purpose. And these are things that I was born with that really they become exasperated throughout my life. And we all have these things. They're all different for everyone based on when and where you were born, planetary alignments, things like that. This is something I was not familiar with before I looked at this, but now I see very clearly how the universal process works and how we're basically come here to learn lessons and overcome our karma and hopefully evolve. And so as I was working through this material, I knew that I had to deal with these issues within me, that if I just ran away, yeah, I could say I'm running away from him. He's a horrible person. He did this and that to me, and he hurt me and broke my heart, and all that. And I could be completely justified in doing that, and nobody would fault me for that. But the problem is I would be going away with a gut full of these vipers, and I wouldn't know what to do with them. So I challenged myself. Basically, I'm someone who always was looking for spiritual enlightenment, always adjacent to it, but never quite sure how to get to it. I thought about it a lot, but I never really could. I never understood what it meant to spiritually evolve or awaken until after this heartbreak and this energetic break, and sitting alone in my home, deciding how I wanted to proceed. I can be a victim, sure, but I'm looking at this material and I'm realizing that my propensity to become a victim is really the reason why I've suffered so much in my life. Is my own power was never engaged, and I gave it to whomever I gave it to based on the relationship, whether it was a boss or a boyfriend or a husband or whatever. And of course, I didn't realize any of this. I always felt like a strong person who knew myself, but it's amazing how little we know ourselves when we don't really investigate what bothers us or what hurts us or what causes us pain and anguish, the things we hide from within us because we don't want to know those things about us. So as a conscientious person with an eye towards spiritual enlightenment, I knew I had to do this. So I started to really look at myself, and over a 7-month period, while I'm still working with this man, and after he finally moved out of my home, which took 6 months after our divorce was final. So we were divorced a year and a half ago. He lived with me 6 months after that, and he's finally gone. He left almost a year ago now. So this was a really long period of time where I was caught in this trauma, and I couldn't get the space I needed to heal. So when he finally moved out, which was an effort on its, that was another effort because he didn't want to leave. Um, I really didn't know how to take care of myself, and I collapsed, which I talked about in the last episode. I ended up in hospital, and I realized that my need for him to feel comfortable was always at my expense, and I didn't understand this until the very end of our relationship. And then I'm left here alone, completely broken. He's finally moved out, and I'm literally exhausted in my home trying to figure out how am I going to feel better. I was not only traumatized, like emotionally, but physically now I was exhausted. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't breathe without, breathing really deep, and my heart would always race, and I just really went through this trauma. I mean, that's what it was. And the fact that he wouldn't leave my home, and when I would say to him, "Could I know we've been together a long time. We bought this home together. You've lived here all these years. I understand it's hard to go, but we're divorced now. I bought the house from you. You need to go." And of course, I'm always doing it in a way that I'm trying not to rock the boat, and which was obviously something I've learned about now, but he did not wanna leave. He would just tell me he couldn't. So after 6 months of this, I, uh, I my body just gave away, and I ended up in hospital anyway. He finally moved out. I started to really look at the situation, and based on what he had told me, started to really realize what I was dealing with. This man was, what I characterized as an emotional vampire, and I wrote an article about emotional vampires. It's on my blog, which is linked below. This article is not about my life with him. It is in general about a emotional vampire and the type of person they are. The time I wrote this, I was not ready to write about my own situation. I didn't understand it yet. So basically, at the end of 9 years together, I really got the first hint that this person was different. It was 9 years into our relationship that I first got an inclination that really didn't never left me. It was just a benign situation where we were working on something for the business, and I was doing something that he was supposed to have done, and I'd mentioned it a few times, and he just kept blowing it off, and I finally said to him, I said, "Why are you allowing me to do all this work when you're supposed to be doing part of it?" And his answer rung in my brain for years following was, "I can be selfish sometimes." I had never heard anyone speak like that before, and after the relationship I had with this man for 9 years, which was very affectionate, very loving, he would tell me he would call me beautiful every time he spoke to me. He told me he loved me every time we spoke. He was very charming, seemingly very open, but there were things about him that were a little different that really didn't come to light later, but after he told me, "Well, I can be selfish sometimes," I just was kinda put on alert. I'm like, "That was such an odd thing for somebody to say." And it wasn't until, like, till 6 years later that I started to understand who he was, and he started to really show the side of him that he had worked so hard to hide up until then. So now we're talking 15 years into the relationship where I'm starting to understand that this person doesn't seem to have an emotional core. And the issue we suffered 15 years in was of a sexual nature. And I became very upset because he had done something very insensitive in our intimate life. And I really didn't understand what was going on. And when I asked him if he could please explain to me why this is happening, he would just act like there was nothing wrong. So basically, what had happened is I had a tumor on my pituitary gland, and I had been taking birth control for years and years, and the birth control had masked the symptoms that I was suffering because of this pituitary tumor. So, I missed a lot of the early signs. So what had ended up happening to get my attention, I was actually lactating, and I was not nursing. My daughter was nowhere near that age anymore, and I went to the doctor, and she did some tests. She thought first it was breast cancer, and then we did some tests and found out it was a pituitary tumor. So I had to have this tumor removed. It was benign. It was eradicated quickly, and I haven't dealt with it since. But because of it, I didn't want to remain on birth control because birth control masked the symptoms. And if the tumor came back, I would again be in that same situation. So after 15 years on birth control, I said, we need to do something else. And basically, long story short, because this could get a very, very long, is we opted for, over the counter solutions, none of which he was happy with. And so he offered to get a vasectomy, which I thought was amazing because we're both in our 40s, or I was in my 40s. He was still maybe, I don't know exactly, but I was beyond childbearing years, and wasn't gonna that's not something we were considering anymore, and so he decided that he would get a vasectomy, and I would no longer have to worry about birth control, and I thought that was amazing. So, basically, we were, still experimenting in our intimate life, in ways that he would still be enjoy what was going on, and I could enjoy what was going on, and without condoms and without birth control, it was challenging. So, basically, what had happened is he said he would get the vasectomy, and because he said he would get the vasectomy, our sexual life was really more comfortable for him than me, and I'll kind of leave it there. I was doing what I thought was um, what a compassionate partner would do when the other partner said he was going to take care of something that involved a surgical procedure. So I was a little more. I I was a little more giving than I normally would have been. I guess that's how I could put it. And what had happened is I expected him to get the vasectomy, we'd go back to our normal sex life and everything would be great. But he did not get the vasectomy. And instead he took advantage of the situation that we had in our intimate life, which I didn't know at the time. And I would always question, I would say, hey, this is uncomfortable for me. I'm not really enjoying this. You're going to make that appointment. And yeah, I'm going to take care of it. No problem. And he would never do it. When months went by, I finally, after being in tears and begging, I finally said, we're not going to have sex anymore because you got to get this vasectomy. This is what we're doing is not working for me. And no problem. I'll get it. I'll get it. And so now we're not having sex and he's acting like nothing's wrong. And I'm saying, well, we're not having sex. Is this okay with you? I know you're getting a vasectomy and trying to be this conscientious partner and not understanding what was going on. We're talking weeks and then months. So we're not having any intimate life anymore. And the more I question him, the more he just pulls away. And before I know it, I'm completely frozen out of his life. He is avoiding me. He doesn't touch me anymore. No, he doesn't hold me at night like he used to. He doesn't tell me I'm beautiful or he loves me. He just basically froze me out. And he treated me like I didn't exist. He wouldn't come home. He'd leave and be gone. He wouldn't speak to me. And when I would try to talk to him, he would just act like nothing was wrong. Like, what are you talking about? After several months of this, I finally, after trying to appeal to him over and over, I said, I'm leaving you. I don't know what to tell you. This is unbearable for me. You're ignoring me. You're basically punishing me for what happened when you didn't do what you said you were going to do. I was just completely traumatized. And so I left him. I went and stayed with my brother in another state, thinking it was the end of our relationship. I was just devastated that this person I had been with for all these years would just drop me like I was a hot potato and not even say anything to me and just go on and living with me like nothing was wrong. It was just unbelievable. When I left, actually it's funny because it's not funny, but it's funny now, but he finally went to have the procedure the morning before I left. And I believe this was his way of telling me, "Oh, don't go. I love you." And he had the procedure. I actually took him to have it done. And then he took me to the airport the next day and I left. I thought our relationship was over. I didn't understand who I was with. And we weren't married yet at the time. We didn't get married till after 20 years together. This was 15. I left and I didn't think I was ever coming back. I got rid of all my things and while I was gone, he persuaded me to come home and over a couple week period I agreed because he was now thoughtful and telling me that he knows that he was wrong and that he's gonna make it up to me and he didn't mean any of it and I really believed him. I thought, this person is finally contrite. He's finally acting the way I wished he would have months ago. And, I don't wanna leave this relationship if there's potential there. What we tell ourselves when we think that we know what we're doing. And I allowed him to come and get me. So he drove 2 days to come and get me and bring me home. And all the way I'm telling him, "You're gonna talk me through what happened. You're gonna explain this to me, right?" And needless to say, I came home and I would sit him down and say, "Okay, can we please talk about what happened? Why didn't you deal with any of this then? Why did you let me leave? Why did you allow this to happen?" And he basically said, "I don't know, and I don't wanna talk about it." And over several months, I mean, occasionally, because I was very careful not to push him, try to bring this up and talk about it, reminding him that you told me we would work through this. I need to understand what happened. I don't understand how you could allow that to happen. He would sometimes just get up and walk away from me without a word, and not just walk away from me and just leave me crying. And it was another year later before I left again. And I went to stay with another family member in a different state. And it's funny now because it was so ridiculous, but I let him talk me into coming back again. Again, he would write me letters, several letters explaining how he knew he was wrong and he knew that he had hurt me, and he just needed me to come home and he would fix everything. And so the second time I came home, I really believed that okay, this guy's going to do this. This guy loves me. We have a life together. At this time we're in business together. He's not going to let all this fall just because he doesn't want to apologize. He's going to make this right. Well, I came home and the same thing happened. Just completely ignored and avoided me, and just pretended like nothing was wrong. And then whenever he would speak about it, he would just deny it, and just completely work to reinvent the past so he was not in the wrong. And I was just devastated. And as an empathetic and compassionate person, which I realized much later how empathetic I was severely traumatized by this. And my desire to see the best in him and to really understand what had happened, it just really put me in a position where I was really damaging myself. And of course, at the time, I didn't know it. So I came back again. This is the second time. A year later, I left again. And this time I sold everything I owned. I drove myself there, another state, another sibling. Thank God I had 3 of them. And I was done. I was not coming back. And I was there a few months this time before he convinced me to come home. And I was helpless. I mean, I was helpless. I couldn't move on. I didn't understand what was going on. I just couldn't do it. And this is how severely lacking I was in my ability to take care of myself. And these are the things I had to really look at post divorce, post his moving out. And it was very difficult. I came back the third time, and this time I knew I wasn't going to get what I needed. I knew what I was coming home to, and I just accepted it. I had a man who was affectionate, who was hardworking, who didn't abuse me, so I thought. And I came home. And within a year, we got married because that's what you do when you're completely screwed up. so, um, but I was completely accepting. I wanted to just move forward. I knew that I wasn't going to get the emotional relief that I needed. And I really thought I was going to be okay. I didn't understand how desperately unokay I was. And it wasn't until 4 years later that something happened to really knock me back to where I needed to go, or up, or whatever direction, and really get me to understand where I was and that I needed to get out. And it was around our intimate life again. And looking back, he took advantage of me at a time that I was very vulnerable. I had just had surgery. I was trying to be a compliant, I guess that's really not the best word to use, but I was trying to be a compassionate partner and be giving in the ways that maybe wouldn't have chosen to try to make a difficult situation better. He was going to get the vasectomy. I was going to be more forgiving, and it really turned upside down, and I ended up being devastated by my desire to give to this man more than I should have. So here we are married now. we're going away on a small vacation, and he starts to make comments about our sex life that come out of nowhere, just horrible, hurtful, like someone else was talking to me. I didn't understand or recognize this person, just really hurtful remarks. And when I would say to him, "What did you just say?" He would pretend he didn't say it. And of course, now the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up, and I'm like, "What is going on?" So we go on this vacation, and at this time, I'm full-blown menopausal. I have very little sexual desire. I try very hard and have tried really hard to keep up my end of things, which is another thing that I had to deal with. And I even had a discussion with him about 3 months earlier, telling him that I'm having a really difficult time getting aroused. I'm not gonna be initiating as much. I want us to have a regular sex life, but you have to understand that things are really different for me. I have anxiety, I have lethargy, I was exhausted all the time, and I need you to understand that I'm having a difficult time, and I'm not gonna be initiating as much. I won't ever refuse you, but just understand that I'm going through this. And his response was, "Oh my goodness, of course, I support you." And within a few months, he was making nasty comments about the frequency and the intensity of our sex life. Not to me directly, just in my presence, which was like a stranger saying something horrible to me who didn't even know me and walked by without looking at me. And I just the first time he did it was about a week before we went on vacation. The second time was the morning after an unsuccessful intimate exchange, meaning I attempted to initiate, us coming together, and I couldn't perform. I could not get aroused, and he held me, and I had tears in my eyes because this was something that bothered me a lot. He said it was fine, and that evening, he made another really nasty comment about how men like it and how if I would just let him blah, 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 and I was devastated. I knew that that was the end of my relationship. I didn't understand who this person was. I didn't know this man. I was with this man for almost 25 years, and I had no fucking idea who he was. And excuse my French there, but that's so we had a 6-hour drive home. I was devastated. I tried to get him to talk to me, and of course, unsuccessfully, to the point where by the time we got home, after me screaming and crying for 6 hours nearly, he just denied it ever happened, and he would again, reinventing the past that you're not remembering that correctly. It was a Tuesday, you were wearing blue, and that none of that was right, and he was a master at avoiding and reinventing so he did not have to appear to be in the wrong, and this is something I did not understand his gift for this until that moment where I knew my relationship was over. And over the next few months before I told him that our relationship was over, I again tried to get him to understand what I had gone through, what I was going through, what I had been through, and why can't you help me with this? Can you just apologize? Just admit what you did and apologize. And he just would not. He wouldn't do it. And he would just avoid me instead. And, for a few months I tried really hard, kept telling myself, just one more try, G, just one more, don't let this go. And during this 3-month period, now he was reading a book that was gonna help him. He was seeing a therapist that was gonna help him. He was doing all these new things that he'd never done before, writing me letter after letter after letter, but nothing to my face. He would never tell me he was sorry. Even in the letters, it was just explaining why he was the way he was because of his father and how he grew up and all these insane things that he would say. And I guess I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And he finally, after I told him that I didn't want him anymore, that I knew that we couldn't be together anymore, but we were still living together, I would push him, this is we're over now, just tell me what's going on, tell me, tell me. And he still wouldn't, and we're living together, of course. So a month in after I told him we're finally done, and when he finally started talking, he started to tell me who he was. He started to tell me that he will never own up to anything that he does, that if he breaks something, he'll never fix it, that he will always run away. He will always be right. He will never give me the satisfaction of being right. That he will fight and fight and fight and then leave, and if I'm not better, he'll fight some more, and that if he ever allowed me to "win," quote unquote, then he was taken advantage of, and that's how he learned to be from his father, and that I mean, no attrition, no apology, no ability to understand what he had done. He basically justified everything that he had done by telling me that's what he learned who he learned to be, and that's how you're gonna have to be, otherwise people take advantage of you, and when I finally told him I wanted a divorce, he said, "I'm sorry, I'm just cold-hearted." And that was it. After 25 years together, this man basically told me he had no emotional connection to me at all. That in one of the final things he said to me before I lost my mind, after the divorce was coming, before it was final, I said to him, "Can you just tell me the truth? Did you do what you did to me 9 years ago before I left the first time, the issue in our intimate life?" I go, "Did you do that on purpose? Did you cause me that pain on purpose because you were upset that I wouldn't allow sex after months of you not getting the vasectomy?" And he said to me, "I didn't realize it at the time, but yeah, I guess I did do it on purpose. Torture me, basically, emotionally." And I said again, I said, "So you're telling me that all of that was your anger, your lack of feeling, basically driving you to torture me emotionally?" And he yelled at me and said, "You're not gonna get what you want here." And I said, "You need to tell me, what is the truth? What the hell is going on?" And I'm already gone. I mean, we're still living together because he's not moved out. I'm in one room, he's in another, and I said to him, "What the hell happened?" And he screamed at me and said, "You're not gonna get what you want." And he never raises his voice. He's very good at staying calm. We never fought. It was always emotional warfare. I was always crying, he was always leaving. He screamed, "You're not gonna get what you want," and I said I screamed back, "You need to tell me the truth," and he screamed back at me, "I need sex. Sex drives everything that I do." And that was the moment I knew that I was with a monster. I was with a person who had no soul for 25 fucking years. It was the most devastating thing you could have ever said to me after all those months and years, 9 years of trying to keep this relationship together. Whew. Yeah, it was devastating, and, so fast forward after the divorce is final, which was immediate after that, and it took very little time. Within a few months, we were divorced. Fast forward 6 months after that, divorce is final, and he's still not gone, and I got all this inside of me. I have nowhere to put it, and I wrote him letters saying, "Could you please leave so I can heal? Could you please go stay with your mother, your sister, your friend, anyone?" And he would just tell me no. And again, I ended up in the hospital finally. He left because my sister called him and said, "Could you please leave my sister alone so she can heal?" That's all it took. Someone else knew what he was doing. He gathered his things and left. And I had to go to work with him the next day. So here I am in this space where I know I have to work with this man. I'm holding all this inside of me. I'm completely broken. But I'm thinking to myself, I want to stay because I want to figure out what the fuck is wrong with me. And I know this relationship with this man is going to teach me this. Not only what I went through, but still my day to day with him. This is the material I was working. The Gene Keys was teaching me your relationships teach you who you are because they mirror you. And I remember saying to my sister, sitting at the park, which is where I spent a lot of my time, I have to get this out of my aura. Whatever this is inside of me that is radiating off of me that invited this man into my life, I need it out. So working on myself was really not a choice. It was just I couldn't there was no other direction for me to go. So I stayed with him up until last week when I finally quit. And I finally told him I was done, that I learned all the lessons I needed to learn and it was time for me to move on. And as much as what I went through was horrific, I was so grateful and proud of myself, frankly, for sticking it out and not only going through what I needed to go through to understand who I was to allow this man into my life for so long, but to stay and to really evolve real time with this person, the same one who broke me in half. And I'll say it again, and I need you to understand that if we blame the people who teach us, we're we're blaming the gifts that we get. This man broke me in half, but he did it. It was a benefit to me. It was a gift to me. And if I saw it otherwise, I would just suffer. So he gave me a gift. He broke me in half, and because I was broken in half, I could rebuild myself and I could figure out what was wrong with me and why I did what I did, why I allowed what I allowed. Who am I? And it was the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, but I can tell you that this man, s- I still consider him a friend. He is a part of my life that I will always treasure. He still has not owned up to any of this. He still has avoided, and of course I stopped asking because once I broke in half, there was nothing I needed from him anymore. I still had to deal with residual feelings, which lasted for several months. I had to deal with. But once I finally got to the point where I could disconnect emotionally from this time with him, I knew I was not only healed, but I was evolving way beyond where I was before. And that's really the point of this whole podcast, is to really talk about where I came from, where I came from since this and where I'm going now. And that this man provided an opportunity in my life for me to grow beyond where I would have ever had the opportunity otherwise. Trauma is a teacher. There are other ways to learn. I'm sure you could meditate and find yourself that way. You can be charitable and find yourself that way. For me, I had to break. Trauma was my doorway into this incredible world. So I'm not only healed and recovered from my relationship with this emotional vampire, I am so much better for it. I've evolved beyond where I was before I met this man. I understand who I am at an energetic level. I am not only better, I am different. I'm a different person. I understand my energetic and emotional tendencies. I understand who I want to be, and I understand now where I'm going. And because I opened myself up and allowed this healing to be something I did on my own, completely alone, completely isolated during COVID, mind you, only seeing this man every day when I went to work. That was my life. I lived alone. I I went through something miraculous. I Because I cleared this space inside of me, and it took months and months of crying and wailing and realizations and epiphanies about what happened to me and who I was, to clear all this emotional and energetic space out of my body, to become a different person. I was an empty vessel now. I can be completely rebuilt. And because of that, I started to receive emanations from divine beings outside of my world. Messages, synchronicities in my life, signs from nature, and my life completely changed. And I just want you to go away from this realizing that this man was a gift to me. He was my karmic soulmate. We made this deal lifetimes ago for him to come into my life at this time to cause me to break. And when you start to understand your spiritual nature and who we are as divine beings, because all of us are divine beings, we come into a human form, but we're an energetic being. We come here to learn and to evolve. And if I just blamed him and called him a vampire and told everybody how horrible he was and villainized him, I could certainly do that, but who does that serve? I love this man more than ever. And he probably has his own karma to deal with down the road, and that's none of my business, and I don't wish that on him. But I have a friendship with him because I appreciate him, and I tell him I appreciate him. And no, I never got closure. No, I never got an apology. Never, none of that ever happened. But I don't need it anymore. I evolved way beyond it. And I'm in a life now where my spiritual self, my divine being, is who I am. And I no longer look at these traumas, his trauma, the trauma of my childhood, where, parental molestation and all the shit that happened after that because of my broken psyche. That's all in my past. That was a different person, and I love her. I love her dearly, and she's evolved, and I am a different her now. And there's a different me above me still, my higher self, who's still waiting for me to come to where she is. And I just want you to know that when you start to really take responsibility for who you are and stop blaming other people, your parents, your friends, your lovers, your husbands, wives, your children, you understand why you are who you are because you're born with karma. You're born with issues to solve. And the Gene Keys by Richard Rudd, and I'm going to say this over and over, saved me from having to go through possibly years of pain trying to figure this out. It took me 7 months, 7, to come to the biggest epiphany that I needed, which was that I was as broken and as empty as he was. And I'm writing this all in a book, which will be done probably within 6 months because it hasn't ended yet. The book won't end until my life comes together again, but I'm documenting all of this and all the divinity, all the things that I'm discovering about my divine life, my divine team, my spirit guides, my higher self, the higher self of the man in my future, the man that I'm going to meet within the next year, who's preparing to meet me too. I know what my career is going to be. I know where I'm going professionally, and that I'm going to have great abundance in my life because this is what is supposed to happen now. That I've emptied myself of the garbage that I was born with and all the subsequent garbage that I collected because of this garbage. You are what you eat. I just want you to know that I'm not just healed, I am a different person. The person I was meant to be at this time in my life, and the person who's meant to help others find their way to their highest or higher selves. So now that that part of the story is out of the way, I'm going to focus on what I've learned and where I'm going and all the miraculous things that are happening to me that continue to happen every day. And that the man who broke me is the person who I value the most in my life. And I wish him nothing but the best. And as I leave him and our business behind, I leave him with hopes that he thrives and that he is happy. And maybe he will be, or maybe he'll have to deal with his own karma. It's not my call. But I love him and I tell him that I love him and I hope the best for him as I leave him with the business that we built together, nearly 12 years, and I go on to my next adventure. So from now on, that's what I'm going to talk about. Now you know the dirty story, and It had a purpose. It was the catalyst for all this, so leaving it out would have been irresponsible. So I didn't do it to hurt him, and I didn't do it to gain sympathy. I did it to show you what caused my rebirth. So the beginning of my book is gonna start the same. He's the catalyst, but the rest of it is about me. So please don't feel bad and don't demonize him or anyone like him. These people are in our lives to teach us. And if we choose to be a student, we learn amazing things. If we choose to rebel, we suffer. So that's the message I want to leave you with. And I want to thank you for listening. And this was a much longer episode than I had intended, but I didn't want to cut it short. So forgive the length, and I hope that you got from it what you needed. And if you come back, and I hope you do, that you start to hear about the beauty that blossomed, the rose bush that grew from this incredibly weedy place. So thank you again for listening, and I will talk to you soon.